In the summer of 2024, a team of archaeologists cut a single trench into a quiet limestone hill near Şanlıurfa, Turkey, and within hours they hit stone that should not have been there. Not scattered rubble, not natural rock, carved upright pillars, standing exactly where human hands had planted them more than 10,000 years ago. The hill is called Mendikepe, and what came out of that trench is now forcing archaeologists to ask an uncomfortable question. Is Göbekli Tepe, the site we have called the birthplace of civilization for 30 years, actually the second oldest monument in this region, not the first? For decades, Göbekli Tepe held a title nothing else could touch. Discovered in the 1960s and properly excavated starting in 1994 by German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt, it sat on a ridge in southeastern Turkey holding massive T-shaped limestone pillars carved with foxes, lions, scorpions, and vultures, arranged in circular enclosures that predate Stonehenge by 6,000 years and predate the invention of pottery, writing, and even agriculture itself. Schmidt spent 25 years convinced he had found the world's oldest temple, a place built not by farmers who had settled down, but by hunter-gatherers who gathered to build something sacred before they ever planted a single crop. That idea flipped the standard story of civilization on its head. Religion, Schmidt argued, did not follow agriculture. Religion came first, and agriculture followed, because feeding the workers who built these massive stone circles required people to stop wandering and start farming. Göbekli Tepe became known as the zero point of history, the place where the human story as we know it supposedly began, and in 2018 it was inscribed on the UNESCO World Heritage List, cementing its place as untouchable, except now it might not be untouchable at all. The Taştepeler project, Turkey's Stone Hills initiative, was launched to map the wider network of Neolithic sites surrounding Göbekli Tepe. Karahan Tepe, discovered nearby, already forced a rethink when its own dramatic carvings and structures suggested Göbekli Tepe was not a lone anomaly, but part of a broader culture spread across the region. Then came Mendikepe, located in the rural Payamlı neighborhood of the Ayubiye district, roughly the same corner of southeastern Anatolia that has already rewritten prehistory twice. It was first identified by archaeologist Fatma Şahin, who was already leading excavations at a nearby site called Çakmak Tepe, just 5 kilometers away. Şahin noticed the same telltale signs on Mendikepe's surface that had marked the other Stonehill sites. And when Professor Douglas Baird of the University of Liverpool's Department of Archaeology took over the dig in 2024, working alongside the Şanlıurfa Archaeology Museum and the British Institute of Archaeology, the first trenches confirmed her instinct almost immediately. Baird has spent more than 3 decades excavating sites across Anatolia, and he has been careful, deliberately careful, not to sensationalize what his team is finding. But even his measured language carries weight. He has said that structures appeared as soon as trenches were opened, that the site clearly belongs to the very earliest stages of the Neolithic period, and that it may be slightly older than both Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe. In archaeology, slightly older is not a throwaway phrase. It is a claim that, if confirmed, repositions an entire monument at the very base of the timeline that defines when humans first began building for something beyond survival. Here is what makes Mendikepe different from its now famous neighbors, and why that difference matters more than the age question alone. Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe are instantly recognizable by their massive T-shaped pillars, some standing over 5 meters tall, carved with animals in high relief, and, at Karahan Tepe, human faces staring out from the stone itself. Mendikepe has pillars too, but they are smaller, and critically, they are not T-shaped. Baird has pointed out that this is not a minor stylistic quirk. It suggests an entirely separate architectural tradition, existing at the same time and in the same region as the T-shaped pillar culture, but following different rules. That raises a real possibility. Rather than a single innovation spreading outward from one origin point, the shift toward monumental construction in this part of the world may have emerged from multiple parallel traditions, each solving the same problem of how to build something permanent, but arriving at different answers. The site itself has revealed 3 distinct categories of structure so far. Small buildings, around 3 meters in diameter, that may have functioned as storage or food preparation areas, mid-sized structures, around 4 to 5 meters across, that could have served as domestic housing, and then larger buildings constructed with meticulous stonework that goes well beyond what would be functionally necessary for shelter or storage, strongly suggesting ritual purpose. This is the layout Baird's team is now working to fully understand, piecing together not just when Mendikepe was built, but how a community used the space day to day and what it meant to them. What excavators are essentially watching unfold is the moment a hunter-gatherer population began experimenting with permanence. Not fully settled agricultural life, not yet, but the earliest fumbling steps toward staying in one place, toward building structures that would outlast a single season, toward gathering enough people in one location that some of them needed storage buildings while others built shrines. Baird has specifically noted his team is investigating early plant cultivation at the site alongside the architecture, because the two questions are inseparable. You cannot understand why people started building temples without understanding what they were eating, and you cannot understand what they were eating without understanding whether they were still following herds across the landscape, or beginning to stay and cultivate the ground beneath their own feet. This is where the story becomes genuinely disorienting for anyone who learned the standard timeline of civilization in school. That timeline goes something like this. Humans domesticate plants and animals. Humans settle into villages because farming requires staying put. Surplus food allows some people to stop farming and specialize in other tasks. And eventually, those specialized tasks include religious and ceremonial roles, which produce temples and monuments. Agriculture first, religion later, as a kind of luxury that settled, well-fed societies could finally afford. Göbekli Tepe blew a hole in that sequence the moment radiocarbon dating confirmed its age, because it showed hunter-gatherers building monumental temples thousands of years before agriculture existed in the region. Now Mendikepe threatens to push the origin of that behavior even earlier, and to show that it was not confined to one exceptional site, but was happening in parallel across a network of hills that a highly mobile pre-agricultural population somehow coordinated well enough to build in a shared cultural language, even while following distinct local traditions. Think about what that actually requires. These were not people living in isolated bands, stumbling independently onto the idea of monumental stone architecture. Multiple communities, spread across a region, were engaging in comparable construction projects, exchanging ideas or influencing one another, while still relying on hunting and foraging for food. That means organized labor, shared belief systems, robust enough to justify the enormous effort of quarrying, moving, and erecting large stone pillars, and some form of long-distance contact between groups who were not yet tied down by farms or permanent villages. Everything about that picture challenges the assumption that complex culture requires settled life first. The excavation is still active, and that matters for how you should read every claim currently circulating about Mendikepe. Baird has been consistently cautious in his public statements. He has described the site as connected to the wider Taş Tepeler network, and has said it might be slightly older than Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe, not that it has been definitively proven older by any fixed number of years. Comprehensive radiocarbon results, the kind of hard data that would settle the age question with real scientific weight, have not yet been published in full. What we have instead are field observations, stratigraphic comparisons, and the informed judgment of a team with decades of experience reading these sites, all pointing in the same direction, but stopping short of a locked-in conclusion. That is not a weakness in the story. That is what real archaeology looks like while it is happening, as opposed to the neatly packaged version that shows up years later in textbooks. Understanding why this caution matters requires understanding how dating actually works at sites like this. Archaeologists do not simply look at a stone and guess its age. They rely on radiocarbon dating of organic material, found in direct association with the structures, things like charcoal from hearths, bone fragments, or plant remains trapped in the same layers as the architecture. They also rely on stratigraphy, the sequence of soil and debris layers that build up over time, allowing them to establish relative chronology even before exact dates come back from the lab. Early observations at Mendikepe suggest its earliest layers sit at a comparable, or slightly deeper, stratigraphic position relative to the earliest known layers at Göbekli Tepe, which is part of why Baird's team believes it may predate the more famous site. But stratigraphy alone is suggestive, not conclusive, especially at a site still in its second excavation season. The coming years, as more of the mound is exposed and more samples are processed, will either confirm this early impression or complicate it. And given how much this region has already upended assumptions, complication would hardly be a surprise. There is also the matter of a Çakmak Tepe, the site just 5 kilometers from Mendikepe, discovered and excavated by Fatma Şahin, the same archaeologist who first identified Mendikepe itself. Early evidence from Çakmak Tepe shows dates in a similar range, suggesting the two sites may be twins of a sort, emerging from the same cultural moment, possibly even connected by the same population moving between them, or by direct contact between two closely related communities. If both sites continue to produce consistent early dating, it strengthens the case that this particular corner of the Fertile Crescent was not home to one isolated experiment in monumental architecture, but to a genuine cluster of overlapping, contemporaneous, or even sequential settlements, each contributing a piece to an emerging picture of how humans first began building beyond the demands of pure survival. It's worth stepping back here and asking why any of this matters beyond academic archaeology circles. The story of how civilization began is not a neutral fact sitting quietly in the past. It shapes how we understand human nature itself. If the old model was correct, and religion and monumental construction only appeared after agriculture created surplus and stability, then complex culture is a product of comfort, something humans build once their basic survival needs are handled. But if Göbekli Tepe, and now potentially Mendikepe, are telling us something different, that hunter-gatherers with no fixed home and no guaranteed food supply were still organizing massive collective building projects driven by shared belief, then the drive toward ritual, meaning, and community expression might be far older and far more fundamental to being human than we assumed. It would suggest that the search for the sacred did not wait for humans to become comfortable. It might have been one of the very things that pushed them toward comfort in the first place. There's a broader pattern worth noticing, too. Every major discovery to come out of the Taş Tepeler project so far has followed the same trajectory. A site gets flagged, initial trenching reveals structures faster and more extensively than expected, and the language among archaeologists shifts within a season or two from cautious curiosity to genuine excitement about rewriting regional prehistory. Göbekli Tepe went through this arc across decades before its significance was widely accepted. Karahan Tepe compressed that arc into just a few years. Mendikepe appears to be compressing it even further, moving from initial identification to serious claims about predating Göbekli Tepe within roughly 2 excavation seasons. That acceleration is not necessarily because Mendikepe is more remarkable than what came before. It is because archaeologists working in this region now know exactly what to look for. The methodology has matured, expectations have been recalibrated by prior discoveries, and a team like Baird's, with decades of Anatolian excavation experience behind them, can recognize significant early Neolithic architecture faster than researchers could when Göbekli Tepe was first being uncovered in the 1990s. None of this means the final conclusions are guaranteed to hold. Archaeology has a long history of dramatic initial claims being refined, narrowed, or occasionally walked back once full analysis is complete. It is entirely possible that further excavation at Mendikepe will confirm it sits comfortably within the same broad time window as Göbekli Tepe, rather than clearly predating it by any specific margin. It is also possible that continued work will strengthen the current impression and place Mendikepe firmly as the earliest known monumental site in the region. Either outcome would be significant. Either outcome adds real data to a question that, until fairly recently, seemed largely settled. That Göbekli Tepe stood alone as the definitive starting point of monumental human construction. That certainty is gone now, replaced by a genuinely open and active area of research, playing out in real time in the hills outside Şanlıurfa. What makes this moment particularly compelling is that we are watching the process unfold rather than reading about it after the fact. Most people encounter major archaeological discoveries as finished stories, complete with confirmed dates, polished museum descriptions, and settled scientific consensus. Mendikepe is not that yet. It is mid-excavation, its dating still provisional, its full significance still being argued out between trench walls and lab results. That incompleteness is not a flaw in the story. It is the story. Somewhere in southeastern Turkey right now, a team is carefully brushing dirt away from stone that a group of people, more than 10,000 years ago, decided was important enough to shape, lift, and stand upright, long before anyone had a word for agriculture. Long before anyone had built a permanent home, and quite possibly, long before anyone had ever laid the first stone at what we currently call the 0 point of history. The Şanlıurfa region as a whole deserves attention here too, because Mendikepe is not appearing in a vacuum. This corner of southeastern Anatolia sits within the Fertile Crescent, the broader arc of land stretching across the Middle East that has produced some of the earliest evidence of settled human life anywhere on the planet. It is not a coincidence that Göbekli Tepe, Karahan Tepe, Çakmak Tepe, and now Mendikepe all cluster within a relatively compact geographic area. The region offered a specific combination of wild grains, suitable for eventual domestication, accessible limestone for construction, and a climate stable enough to support increasingly settled behavior even before agriculture was fully developed. In effect, this landscape appears to have functioned as an incubator for a specific set of human behavioral shifts, and the Taş Tepeler project's methodical, coordinated excavation strategy across multiple connected sites is precisely why researchers are now able to see that incubation happening at a network level rather than as a series of unconnected, isolated discoveries. There's also a quieter, more human layer to this story that rarely makes it into the headlines. Every one of these sites, Göbekli Tepe included, was found and interpreted through decades of unglamorous, painstaking labor. Klaus Schmidt spent 25 years at Göbekli Tepe before his work was fully appreciated. Fatma Şahin identified both Çakmak Tepe and Mendikepe through careful surface survey work, the kind of unglamorous groundwork that rarely gets credited in dramatic headlines, but is precisely what makes discoveries like this possible in the first place. Douglas Baird brings over 3 decades of Anatolian excavation experience to a project that, even now, is only in its 2nd full season. None of this is instant. None of it happens through a single dramatic reveal. It happens through seasons of trenching, cataloging, comparing, and slowly building a case strong enough to challenge what an entire field once considered settled fact. So where does that leave Göbekli Tepe's reputation as the 0 point of history? For now, it remains the most extensively studied, and the reason that is terrifying is not because wrong models are unusual. Science is full of models being replaced by better ones. That is how science works. The reason it is terrifying is the timing, because the James Webb Space Telescope was built to answer the deepest questions humanity has ever asked. And instead of answering them, it is revealing that the questions themselves may have been built on a foundation we never properly tested. Consider the scale of what is at stake. The lambda CDM model, the standard model of cosmology, is the framework on which decades of scientific funding, research programs, university curricula, and theoretical physics have been constructed. It is the lens through which we interpret every observation of the universe. Every telescope, every satellite, every calculation depends on it. If it breaks, not in a small patchable way, but in a fundamental, structural way, then the field does not just need a revision, it needs a reconstruction. And reconstructions take generations. According to informed sources within the astrophysics community, the conversation happening right now is not whether the standard model needs adjustment. It is how deep the adjustments need to go. Some researchers believe the solution is relatively contained, perhaps a new form of dark energy, perhaps early dark energy, perhaps some exotic particle physics in the first moments after the Big Bang. Others are less optimistic. Some believe the discrepancies Webb is revealing point to something much more radical, that the geometry of the universe is not what we think, that dark matter behaves in ways fundamentally different from our assumptions, that the very concept of cosmic time may need to be reconsidered. These are not fringe positions. These are being published in Nature, in physical review letters, in the Astrophysical Journal, by Nobel laureates, by the people who built the models in the first place. And then there's the issue that nobody in mainstream coverage is talking about loudly enough. The James Webb Space Telescope may go dark, not metaphorically, literally. In April 2025, reports emerged that the telescope, this $10 billion machine, this once-in-a-generation instrument, the most powerful scientific tool humanity has ever deployed, was facing potential operational disruptions due to funding, pressures, and administrative changes within NASA's scientific programs. The telescope that is in the middle of rewriting cosmology, that is in the middle of answering, or rather demolishing the answers to the deepest questions we have ever asked, is not guaranteed to keep operating. In a moment when what we need most is more data, more observation time, more years of Webb staring into the dark and sending back its incomprehensible findings, the machine itself is under threat. And if Webb goes silent before we fully understand what it has already found, we will be left holding a map that tells us our old map is wrong, without enough information to draw a new one. What the real story is, and what most people are not seeing, is that we are living through a scientific inflection point of a kind that happens perhaps once in a century. The last time cosmology faced a crisis of this magnitude was in 1998, when the discovery of dark energy, yet the realization that the universe's expansion was not slowing down but accelerating, shattered the prevailing model and earned the scientists who found it a Nobel Prize. That discovery required a new ingredient to be added to the cosmic recipe: dark energy, this mysterious force that makes up approximately 68% of the total energy content of the universe, a force we can measure, but cannot identify, cannot explain, and cannot directly observe. We simply know it is there because of what the universe is doing. We named it, we quantified it, we inserted it into the equations, and we moved on, as if naming something were the same as understanding it. Webb is now suggesting that even our understanding of dark energy may be wrong, that it may not be a constant, that it may have varied over cosmic time, that the universe, in other words, has been playing by rules that change. And if the rules change, then the predictions we make from those rules, predictions about the universe's fate, about its age, about the nature of space-time itself, may all need to be reconsidered from the ground up. There's a specific phrase that keeps appearing in the scientific literature generated by Webb's findings. That phrase is tensions with the standard model. It appears in paper after paper, in study after study, and scientists reading those papers understand that tensions is the professional, measured, peer-review-friendly way of saying something is deeply structurally wrong. Because individual tensions are not unusual, one tension can be a measurement error. Two tensions can be coincidence, but when tension after tension after tension emerges from a single telescope pointing at a single universe, when the impossible galaxies and the broken Hubble constant and the sterile exoplanets and the dormant galaxies and the impossibly early structures all point in the same direction, you are no longer dealing with noise, you are dealing with a signal. And the signal is telling you that the universe is not what you thought it was. Astronomers using Webb in January 2026 found something dubbed JWST's quintet, a collision of at least 5 galaxies interacting in a compact region of space just 800 million years after the Big Bang, far earlier than any model predicted such complex galactic interactions could occur. The system was surrounded by oxygen-rich gas, oxygen, an element produced by stellar fusion, which requires stars to have lived and died, meaning stars had already completed entire life cycles, billions of them, far earlier than the timeline allows. The researchers were clear. This was not expected. Before Webb, astronomers assumed complex galaxy mergers and the widespread distribution of heavy elements would not become common until well over 1 billion years after the Big Bang. Webb found them at 800 million years. And each time Webb finds something like this, the gap between what the model predicts and what the universe actually contains grows wider. Meanwhile, the little red dots, mysterious, small, intensely bright objects first spotted by Webb in the earliest eras of the universe, continue to resist classification. By mid-2025, astronomers had compiled a massive catalog of them, all dating back to the first one, 5 billion years of cosmic history, and found that a large proportion appeared to contain supermassive black holes that were actively growing. Supermassive black holes at the hearts of nascent galaxies, already billions of times the mass of our Sun, already feeding, already dominant, in an era when the universe was too young by conventional timelines for objects of that scale to have formed. Some researchers have proposed these are a new class of galaxy entirely. Others suggest they represent a phase of star formation so intense and so rapid that our models simply do not have a mechanism to explain it. Nobody fully knows. And in science, when nobody fully knows, that is not the end of the story. That is the beginning of the crisis.